promise, are the hardest slides in the film. So, screw yourself to your chair here. This comes from Thomas Aquinas, a medieval theologian, who says there are three essential elements of a beautiful thing. It has integrity, which is wholeness or completeness. It has consonantia, which means consonance or due proportion in relation to an end. The origin of this word, Latin, con means together, and sonar, sonare means to sound. Things that sound good together, so they're harmonious. And the claritas, which is the power of the thing to reveal itself, to reveal its ontological reality. That means its heavenly reality at the end of time. So I remember when I was a kid, the Justice League was one of the Saturday morning cartoons that I watched. Still on? Okay. What does Wonder Woman's jet look like?
Say that again?
Wonder Woman's jet. Anybody know? Jet. Her plane, her airplane. It's invisible, right? And how do they know? How do you know she's flying in it? Well, they draw this little line around it, right? And you can see through the rest of it.
Right.
But it had no claritas. Even though it's clear, strangely, it can't reveal what it is, right? Because it's invisible. And so if you made people a bunch of food and say, oh, this is an invisible food, well, you wouldn't really call it invisible because you wouldn't be able, beautiful because you wouldn't be able to see what it is. If you leave out some of the ingredients in your food, then you don't have completeness. And if you put in a whole lot of truffle oil and not a whole lot of flour, right, you're going to have this overwhelming power of truffle oil. So everything has to be there, it has to be in proportion, and then it has to be able to be revealed. What's that metal thing people put over food called that they keep it hot? It has a little hole in the top and you take it off. I always forget the word.
You cover.
Cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a cloche, is that the word?
Yeah.
Sometimes, okay. Well, see, I'm overthinking it. It's just the cover. Right? The cover over the food, you can't see the food, right? And so it's not quite yet revealed. So how would you analyze God in relation to these things? The typical thing is that if you have 2 out of 3 of these, the experience might be pleasant, but 3 out of 3 might be beautiful. So if it looks good and smells good, it might be pleasant. If it tastes good, it tastes bad, then it's not really beautiful. Could you analyze God in relation? Is God incomplete? Imperfect? Right? Is God in disproportion? The Holy Spirit and Jesus are fighting all the time. I'm bigger than you, so I'll beat you up. No, right? The 3 persons of the Trinity are in perfect relationship of love. And then Godness has a power to be revealed. So people will often say that crucifixion, there's a whole school of theology that people say it's divine child abuse. God sent his son to go suffer. What kind of God, what kind of father would send this kid off to get crucified? So can you speak of the crucifixion as beautiful? They have this picture of it here that's very famous, called the Grunwald altarpiece. And it was in a hospital chapel for people that had skin diseases, and they were all suffering, And so they chose to show Christ really kind of beat up and sickly, so that they could see that, Jesus suffered as they suffered. But can you call this beautiful?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. How can you do it according to the way we were talking about it? Yeah.
Well, I guess not, like looking at a picture like this, if you never knew what the crucifixion is or anything, you wouldn't say somebody kneeling on the cross and everyone sad isn't beauty in itself. But knowing the history behind it, that Jesus died for us, is that beauty?
Right. So you said the word "no," right? That's very important. That's beautifully painted, or beautifully rendered. But this is not a pretty scene, right? And if you don't know what this is about, you would say, "Oh, why is that guy tortured on a log? That's horrible." But what does this say? If you want to say, well, how can you argue if the crucifixion was a beautiful thing? There are a couple of phrases from Scripture. It said, God so loved the world that he sent his only son, right, to suffer and die. So this is an evidence of love. I love you this much that I will allow this to happen to me, to redeem you from the power of evil. Every now and then you hear a story about a mother who's pushing a baby carriage, and there's a truck coming, and some guy pushes the carriage out of the way and then gets hit by the truck, right? So he gives up his life to save the baby. That's an ugly thing to get hit by a truck, but it's a beautiful thing to say, I love you enough more than myself. So you're talking about the ontology of human dignity to sacrifice for another, and then love kind of radiates through. Even if it's not pretty, get hit by a truck or something like this. So pretty and beautiful are not the same thing. So here's a phrase from St. Thomas. In Latin, but I'll give you the English too. Literally, beautiful are called things which, when seen, please. So people say, oh, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I look at it, I like it, and therefore it's beautiful. But there's another way to think about it. Things which, if there are things, then they exist, right? So they have being. When seen means when perceived. in Latin, visa is a verb that can mean two different things. One of them is to literally see with the eye. The other one means to be apprehended in its essential reality. So when you really see it and you're pleased by it, that's the revelation of ontology, which is this definition of beauty we're talking about, the ness of the thing. And please is consonant with our nature. So we are ordered toward things that are good. And so we delight in things that are good. Now, if you delight in things that aren't good, there's a problem with you, typically, not the other way around. But it requires knowing what good is. So beautiful things are an experience of the good. They reveal this supernatural reality, kind of the understanding of the mind of God. And to do that, you can't lack anything. And beauty, which pleases upon being seen, not the same thing as beauties in the eye of the beholder. This is a kind of a misrepresentation, not just in the eye, but in the mind. I'm knowing and therefore able to perceive what is beautiful. So let's do a little exercise here. Remember, these are the three constituent elements of beauty: wholeness, proportionality, and the power to reveal itself. So, is a gazelle with no legs beautiful?
No.
Which one of these things is it lacking?
The wholeness.
Wholeness, right. Now, how about a person with no legs?
Yeah, he's beautiful.
Yeah, has a human dignity, right? But you would still hope that person ideally would have the legs, but just because they don't have legs doesn't mean they lose their essential ontological category of human dignity, right? So you can say, oh, how terrible that I lost my arm. Well, why does God want that experience of deprivation? But it's still a deprivation. A slug with no legs.
He doesn't
Have
have
legs.
Legs are not part of slugness, so therefore they're not deficient. But you have to see which category they're in. A dinner with no food and no plates.
Oh my God.
Oh. Which one of these is work? Which one is what's? Look.
It's all of them.
Well, it's lacking food, right? So it's an integritas problem. It's not proportional to the idea of dinner, right? So therefore it's not a consonantia problem, and it's not revealing dinner, right? There's no dinner there. So obviously, this is not that complicated, really. How about a well-designed racist propaganda poster? So I'm the head of some KKK thing. Not really, but I mean. And I get the best graphic designer and the best advertising agencies, and I come up with the most compelling commercials. People would say, oh, those are pretty. I mean, the Nazis did this, right? They found the best architects, the best playwrights, the best movie makers. They had great architecture. Whereas, was it all beautiful? No. So what's the flaw?
The last one. The third.
Well, it's revealing
Oh, no,
racism,
it is revealing.
Goodness.
but it's not proportional to human dignity, right? And it's also not complete because it's missing the truth about human nature and human dignity. So this is where beauty can sometimes be a little bit dangerous because you can be attracted to something that then turns out to be false. And so you always have to know and not just experience and emotionally made. How about a wedding dinner that is skimpy and badly made?
Oh,
It
this
doesn't
is good.
reflect the nature of abundance
Right.
of love.
Right.
The wedding is supposed to.
So it's not celebratory, it's not festive, it's not beautiful. So what's it lacking? Well, all that stuff. Okay, here's that word fondant again. Using fondant to make something that looks like peaches but tastes like liver. Which one of those is not right?
The truth.
The third one is it.
Right, because it's not revealing what it is, and it's not proportional to the one thing to the other, and then it's not. It doesn't have the right flavor. So it's, well, usually when one of these goes, the other two go as well. So I found this, April Fool's Day foods. This is pound cake with frosting and a half peach. Oh, I'm looking at your face like, oh, that's delightful. This is vegetables wrapped in white bread, made to look like sushi, to make your kids eat their best vegetables. And so there's a mismatch between what it looks like and what it is, right? Which is a proportionality problem. But this is what humor is, and you can have humor in food too. It's a conjunction of opposites or a conjunction of incongruous things in a surprising manner. So sometimes when it looks like something and it is something else, it's delightful. Oh wow, you know, that's pretty cool. This is how you can have fun with food. But sometimes, I mean, this looks like something else, but it's still delightful. If it looked like this and tasted really bad, that would be a trick that's not. Okay, so here's a dining room. I went to this before and after dining room renovations. Here it is. Is it beautiful? Does it participate in beauty at all?
Well, the ceiling is kind of nice. It's got good light.
Is there any dining roomness here at all?
I mean,
The shape.
You can't eat there now.
Is it a room?
Yes.
It's a
Yeah,
room.
okay, so it's
Right.
participating in roomness.
Right.
You might not know it's dining room, you just presume that I'll tell you it is.
The shape looks like it could be a dining room, because dining rooms have to have space for a large amount of people in a long,
Mhm.
you know, it should be a rectangle.
So that's a proportion question. Is this room proportional to the table and the kind of feast that happened there? Is there a serious integritas problem going on here, though? More than one?
Yes.
What is it?
It's missing the table.
Right.
No table,
No
no chairs,
no people, no
no
food.
people, no food. What about this?
A hole.
No window, right? So- and then here's the thing renovated.
Wonderful.
So is this more beautiful, less beautiful? And how can you actually, other than the emotional response, can you actually intellectually say it has more beautiful?
Yes.
Yes.
How come?
It's completed.
It's
with the
completed.
table with the chairs.
Right?
It's proportion, size, it accommodates the table.
Right.
And then the.
It has that window that it didn't have before, right?
You can see the truth in it.
Now, is this the only way that they could have decorated this? Is this the universal
No.
beauty?
No.
No, this is a little B beauty. It's not a big B beauty. You could have had a million decorators come in and decorate this room a million different ways that were all beautiful. Or you could have someone come in a million different ways and make it not beautiful. So the problem that most people have now with beauty is they take one personal preference and try to universalize it as the universal thing, as opposed to saying beauty has an infinite number of manifestations, and this just happens to be one of them, and they all participate in beauty in different ways. But you can also make it less beautiful or not beautiful by not having a window, not having a chair, not having all the things you need. Let's see. I had a good time putting this talk together. Is this a beautiful dining room?
A little cluttered.
I mean, who do you think lives here? A hip, childless couple in Lincoln Park?
What?
A hip, childless couple in Lincoln Park?
This is an elite family.
Yeah.
Maybe they live in Connecticut. And so you see there is a sign value that goes with all the choices that are made. What are you trying to establish by having an 18th century chair? Oh, I'm from the first families of the Mayflower, right? And so you have to be careful of associations, but there's a beauty proper to the first families of the Mayflower, right? And there's a beauty proper to hip urban couples as well. And so then let's look at the object aside from its associations. Does it seem to be complete? Does it seem to have everything it needs?
Yes.
Does everything seem proportionate to what is happening there?
Yes.
Maybe you think there's too much going on?
Yes.
Now that's a proportion too, right?
Yeah.
You can be deficient, but you can also have an excess. And so somebody's deciding to be really festive or really everyday.
Festive.
Yeah, right? Stuff in our tradition equals festivity. In fact, this is a really complicated theory of festivity. When you're being festive, you hang stuff on stuff.
Right.
That's it. What do you do to your house at the holidays? Hang stuff on it, right? What do you do at Christmas? Put a tree in the corner and hang stuff on it. So why am I wearing this thing around my neck? I'm going to have a button to hold my collar because I'm doing something important. Festivity, hang stuff on stuff. Stuff hanging on stuff, stuff on the walls, stuff on the table, stuff. Right? And sometimes the festivity can overwhelm what you're celebrating. And so there's always this balance between what it ought to be and what it is. And you could argue, someone wants to be really festive, you can have that sort of temporary excess, it's fine. This is another definition of beauty that came from the 15th century architect when he's talking about buildings, but it can apply to a lot of things. He said it's a reasoned, that is intellectually understood, harmony of the parts, so that nothing can be added, taken away, or changed, but for the worse. So everything is complete, in the right place, and it's all right, and if you do anything to it, it gets worse. So could you add anything to this to make it worse?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe like 1,000 more chairs, right? That would be worse. Could you take anything away from this to make it better?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a little cleaner, maybe a little less fussy. You know, that's when you start to say, well, I don't know, let's talk about this. I did this because. Well, the guy coming to dinner and his wife, they love this kind of flower, and even though it blocks the view out the window, I want them to know that they're special, right? Then you have a reasoned harmony of the parts, even though at first blush it might look excessive. Is this a beautiful table set up for a meal?
Yes.
Like, could you sit there and eat?
Where's the space? It's not set up for a meal.
It's an antique shop, right? And they said, here's all the stuff we want to sell you. It almost looks like it could be a meal because there's silverware and all that, but it's not proportionate. Everything's not in the right place and proportionate to what a meal ought to have, even though it has a lot of stuff. So there's kind of an excess of too much stuff and a deficiency in that there's not the stuff you need. Now this, I put in fancy dinner settings in a Google search, and this came up. So now it's a little more subtle. First you start with the obvious examples, this is a little more subtle. Is this a beautiful table setting?
Yes.
I don't know.
We got a yes and an I don't know. There might even be a no in the room. But how would you start to analyze that question?
It's completed with all the plates and
Right.
everything, knives, forks, everything. It
Mhm.
looks like it's proportionate with the amount of chairs that is around the table. The only thing is, it is kind of tight, so that would be the only problem. with
Right,
that.
if
People
somebody's
can't
sitting
see
over
each
there,
other.
yeah.
Right, right.
I hope they're not gonna have conversation.
Right, and you can't, right.
Well, it doesn't look like there's any seating back there, but even this person.
There is
says
seating
that
back
person.
there. There is
Here?
seating.
Oh, yeah, those are chairs, aren't they? Yeah.
So the thing is that the
But
plants
those
need
three in
to
a
be
row are
low.
gonna be having such intimate conversations.
Right.
It's just not gonna
Right.
be-
You hope there's not a lefty next to a righty, right?
Right, you need more arm room, but then the plant is too high proportion-wise and height the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a little bit lower or taller, but being able to see through it.
Right, and notice this is primarily an intellectual discourse we're having. We're not just saying, I like that, or I hate that, although you might have that response at first. If you're talking about beauty and not just subjective response, you're talking about the objective reality of this thing held up to a standard that's known in the mind. And that's the kind of stuff you learn in school. What are the standards? But then, just like making that fake egg out of pound cake, you can break the rules if there's a time and a place for it. So it's never packed in a little box, one little square peg in a round hole. How about this? Is this a beautiful place setting?
Yes.
I'm not getting a kickback from McDonald's, I promise you. Easiest pictures. Now, if you had 15 minutes between classes and you ran downstairs, right? The ontological category, fast food, is a little like this. Now, when I was doing this McDonald's looking around, I found this. There's some place in New Zealand that's trying to have fancy McDonald's. Glasses for your float and china and everything. Is that a beautiful table setting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not really.
Is it appropriate to eating at McDonald's?
In there, in Brazil, yeah.
Yeah, is it completely inappropriate? No, but these are a little mixing of categories here, and that's when it gets a little fuzzier. That's when you have to kind of make prudent decisions. There's not really a clean right or wrong answer. I'm actually, believe it or not, a big fan of White Castle.
I was like, wedding.
Yeah, right. And they have Valentine's Day. You can make a reservation, and they have tables. It's really a distortion of what White Castle is, right? But it's kind of fun, and so fun is different. When you're having fun, you can do some different things rather than strict, kind of rigid, objective, scientific reality. Okay, so TV dinners, right? So, extra guests for dinner? You're ready for it. Right, there he is. Can't wait to eat that TV dinner. Now, the TV dinners, are they proportionate to a midnight snack? Maybe never. But it would be more proportionate to a kid's lunch or a midnight or a Thanksgiving Day. Right, a kid's lunch has a certain expectation. It's a certain ontological reality. Why Thanksgiving Day? Why is it less appropriate for Thanksgiving Day?
Supposed to be a larger meal.
Right.
Right. Festivity is different than eating, right? And so eating festively. So ontological category matters. Dinner at the White House with the heads of state? Probably not. So which one of these strikes you as being the worst meal?
The Frankenbacon coffee.
Well, Frankenbean. Which one has the frozen meal is farthest from its ontological dignity that you should know about? This one?
Oh,
Turkey. This is trying to be Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
This is trying to be mac and cheese. And so they're all food. They all exist in reality. They all have a certain beauty proper to themselves. But the ontological category really matters a lot. So I found this diagram too. The formal meal and the informal meal. So what if I switch these words? Would this be appropriate for an informal meal? No, it's the ontological category, right? That it's a proportionality problem. And the formal meal is missing all that stuff, so it's an integritas problem. And therefore it's not beautiful, even or fully beautiful as it ought to be. And why is the salad fork smaller than the dinner fork? That's a proportionality, right? That's a consonancy question. How come?
Because it's for the food you're going to eat.
Right.
Yeah. What were you saying?
It signifies what you're using it for.
Right.
Right, so you know which is which, first of all, right? And eating salad doesn't require quite as much, moving around as a dinner fork. And obviously a steak knife is for things you need to cut with more effort, and a butter knife not. And so there's a foundation of this in just the practical necessities. All right, what do we have here? This theologian of the early 20th century named Jacques Maritain, and he said, "In beautiful things, the mind is spared the least effort of abstraction and rejoices without labor." Abstraction in the theological term doesn't mean like abstract art with big patterns of color. It means you see a lot of examples and you figure out what it is. So I see this chair right here, and I've never seen a chair before. I will think all chairs look exactly like that. Well, then I see King Louis's throne and this chair, and I say, oh, there's more than one kind of chair. Then I see 5,000 other chairs, and I kind of figure out what chairness is. I'm looking at all of you, and I say, this is what students at Lexington look like. If I saw you first, I'd say, oh, they all are clones of you, right? Eventually, I abstract out what students are here. If you only see one woman, you might think every woman looks like this woman. And you see lots of women, you figure out what womanness is. And so when things are beautiful, they reveal what they are to you, and you don't have to say, what is that? Let's see, the menu says roast beef, but it looks like chicken. What's going on? So roast beef presented with its roast beefness. You don't have to labor to figure out what it is. So it's excused the customary task of figuring out what to do. DMAC is my nickname, by the way. You can feel free to call me. Denis McNamara, that's my rapper name. So the reality of the object is so beautiful, clearly, and properly evident that you don't have to ask, what the heck is it? Right? What is it? When I don't know if anybody grew up in New York. When I was a kid, there was a kind of Bozo the Clown show on Sunday morning called Wonderama.
Yeah.
And they had this game where all the kids in the audience, they'd show a picture of something, and this guy would come up with a microphone and say,
Oh, yeah.
what the heck is it? And I remember they had a vegetable steamer one time with the little flaps that close, and kids were saying it was a satellite and all that stuff. So knowing what it is means I have to know what it is, but also the thing should reveal what it is. Do you have a question?
I do have a question. So if beautiful things spare least effort of abstraction, that's maybe the claritas aspect of
exactly.
And so with modernity, I'm thinking of Picasso and and so abstraction comes into play. Do you think that was a rejection of beauty, a desire to disassociate art and beauty, or is it expanding the concept of beauty?
Well, it's a good, complicated, beautiful question. When you read the manifestos of a lot of modernist artists and architects, some of them were intentionally saying, we reject the inheritance of the last 2,000 years. They're saying things like that. Mies van der Rohe is very famous in Chicago for his architecture, put out a little manifesto, and he said, not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow, not yesterday, only today can be given expression. He's saying the materials of our time are glass, steel, concrete, these are the materials of industry. So all that churchy, traditional churchy stuff, that's yesterday. We don't do that anymore. And so he made big glass buildings, and he made that chapel at IIT that looked like the glass and brick buildings, right? Because the churchiness was yesterday. So that wasn't like intentional rejection. But see what happens when you don't know what it is, because it looks like something else. If your paradigm of all buildings is the factory, which is what a lot of architects said, everything looks like a factory. That's like saying my chicken is going to look like roast beef, my Lucky Charms are going to look like roast beef, chocolate pudding is going to look like roast beef. All of a sudden you start losing the capacity to understand, which is claritas, and therefore you lose beauty. Unless, of course, you're making factories, and then it's appropriate to the factories. Painters can do the same thing. In the 19th century, they were so tired of all these kind of Victorian, sweet little saccharine paintings of little rosy-cheeked babies, trying to sell you stuff. They said it's not about anything. It's just a surface. So what we have to do is crack it, break it open, and show you the interior reality of humanity. And because they're not Christians a lot of time, and they're a lot of times unhappy, they see the human reality as broken, violent, destructive. And so they say the only thing that's true about humanity is to make representations of violent, destructive, unhappy people. And then you say, well, is that accurate? In fact, the Pritzker Pavilion, which is down here, the big aluminum thing, the guy who designed that, Frank Gehry, wrote an essay, and he said, ever since the beginning of time, we've been trying to put order on society, street grids and buildings and law courts and laws and moral codes and religion, and we still rape, rob, murder, and kill. The only thing we know for sure is that we're bound to chaos. So the only thing that's true about us is we're bound to chaos. The only thing that's true about that architecture is we have to represent chaos in architecture. So he takes a piece of paper, aluminum foil, throws it in the corner, crumbles it up, and says to his architects, go make a building out of that. And that's why you have this over here, right? And so you say, wow, that's cool. I've never seen a building that looks like a crumbled up piece of aluminum foil. And so that's the subjective response. But what's the objective critique of that? All we are is bound to chaos, disorder, rape, murder, robbery.
It's not true.
it's not true about the human nature. Yes, we're prone to those things, but we can, with God's grace and self-will and united to grace, be people who live beautifully, nobly, and well. So the essential intellectual questions are then expressed based on what you believe. And the Claritas will reveal that. Hopefully, if the artist is good, they'll reveal it well. If the artist is not good, they may not. So let's see. I've already done those questions, so we'll do something like this. So to be is to be beautiful. So is everything equally beautiful?
No.
Is a slug equal to a person?
No.
No. But they both have existence. They both have beauty. Here's another one of these lines. A thing is most beautiful in proportion to its perfection in being. So I have more capacity to exist in perfection in being than a slug does. And a slug has more than a rock, because a slug can move, a slug can eat, different capacities. So you'd say, who has perfection of being with a capital B? Who's being itself? God, right? And so then you say, which of all creatures has the highest potential for being like that perfection of being? Humans, right? Because we have various abilities. So here's a little chart that's in an old philosophy book I found from the 50s. The powers of man. You could say the powers of humans, if you like. But we have vegetative powers, right? Don't sit there like a couch potato. Nutrition, growth, reproduction. Then there are these additional animal powers, and you can move, locomotion, and have different feelings. When you get up to the rational powers of intellect and will, then you're talking about things that humans have. You're closer to fullness in the perfection of godness. And so a plant can take nutrients out of the soil, and a plant can do things we can't do, like photosynthesis. No matter how hard I try, I cannot grow a tomato off my arm. And so different ontological categories exist, yes. Beauty belong to tomato plants, yes. But here's a cat, fancy feast, appetizers. Now, really, can a cat have an appetizer?
No.
Can a cat celebrate? Who are they selling this to? The owner, right? So they're saying, cats don't buy food, people buy food, and so people like appetizers, let's sell it to them. And so it's kind of a mismatch of their ontological category. How about this one? Now, do dogs eat like this normally?
No.
No. See, we're putting human categories on that. And I'm sorry, this is a little crude. Tell my dog, don't take a picture of that. It's cat food. Sometimes dogs don't eat what they ought to eat, right? So dogs have certain capacities to have nutrition. I mean, if you've ever given your dog a bone or one of those treats, you can see they get excited about it more than a plant does about nitrogen in the soil. But they have different capacities. So, human dignity there at the top, Harold and Kumar. Going to White Castle?
Yeah.
Now this was something I found online. This is the Deal or No Deal. They had a forced all-you-can-eat Thanksgiving thing. And all those models, what's his name here, was pushing their heads into the food. And all the feminists were going crazy that this was demeaning. And it is, right? Forcing people to eat essentially out of a trough. That is not consonant with human dignity. And so we're reverting from the powers of humanity back to the powers of animals. And that's not consonant with human dignity. Or this, right? This is the famous Coney Island hot dog eating contest, and this is what you feel like after you eat.
It's so gross.
Now we have the power to do this, but then there's always the question, ought you do this, right? And so it's kind of fun for a while until you're done. Or you can have a well-balanced meal, I was trying to find I put in a Google search for well-balanced dinner, and I couldn't really find anything. The right proportions of meat, vegetables, seasoning, spice, salt. This is a chart of, I don't know if you talk about these things, it's called like a flavor wheel or something, where salty and sweet are good together, or acid and fats and that kinds of things. So there's proportions, that consonancia of beauty, that can all work. But notice, it's all up here. Intellect and will. You have to remember your recipes. You have to have imagination of what you could do. You have to see your food. You have to hear if your things are, sizzling, smell if they're burning, taste if they taste good. All that stuff. It requires all these senses. But ultimately, it's up here in our higher powers as human beings. So what's a feast compared to a meal? There's a guy named Joseph Pieper who wrote all these books about festivity. And he said in festival or in celebration, the conceptual elements come together. Relaxation, effortlessness, and the ascendancy of being at leisure. And he says only humans really can delight in a meal, because public celebrations they rise up out of your effortless sense. So like the Cubs win the World Series, right? It may never happen, but if it did, would people storm the court or storm the field? They'd say, wow, that's great. It's not like, oh, I've been forced to celebrate or else they'll shoot me, right? After the French Revolution, you know, all these, the government tried to have all these festivals of rationality and the goddess of reason, and nobody cared about the goddess of reason. And if you didn't come, you could be arrested. They wanted to go to Mass and celebrate the Virgin Mary because they actually believed in that. And so you can't have an effortful celebration, even though it might take a lot of effort to cook. The celebrating itself should be not forced, but easy. So what is a fast compared to, what is a feast compared to a meal? What's the difference between a feast and any old meal?
Feast is, go ahead.
A feast is celebratory.
Celebratory, intentional. How about a fast compared to being too busy to eat?
It's
It's
intentional.
Intentional, right? So can a slug feast? Can a slug eat?
Yes.
Can a dog feast?
Yes.
That gets us see, a dog has a higher potential for perfection of being, right?
Right.
And so they get closer to our understanding what a feast is. But does a dog really know it's Thanksgiving? No. Maybe they just know they're having turkey instead of dog, right? Can a slug fast? No. Can a slug starve?
Yeah.
Right? So it's the same thing, no food, but one has the engagement of the intellect and the will, and one of them doesn't. So I want to finish up with a little music exercise. Just transferring this to another field. If you're at church and you sing "Glory to Satan in the highest and death to God's people on earth," that is bad. Not beautiful, right? Because it's not true. After the Cubs win the World Series, you go out and you sing, "I feel really sad and the wife left me and the house burned down." Right? It's your favorite sad Western song. You run out on the court and sing that? No. What do you sing? "We are the champions." Right? It's proportional to the event. I just heard this song, "Sunshine, Lollipops, and You sing that at a funeral?
You could.
You could. Now, why could you? Why could you?
Because it could be the person's favorite song,
Uh-huh.
or you're celebrating the home going instead of
You might sing,
a death.
this person is happy with God now, we're happy
Right.
about that, right? So death always has the combination of sadness and hopeful expectation of joy. How about this? This proper form for setting a text to music. So let's pick a theme. Let's start Spangler Banner. Glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. Would you do that?
For the start, what?
Glory to God in the highest. Or what's the theme from Star Wars? Glory to God in the highest. I'm saying, why is this absurd? Well, music, in traditional understanding, is a vesting of the text. So you see a guy or a gal, they're standing there, oh, there's a guy in the corner. You see that same person in a policeman or police officer's uniform, you say, oh, that person's a police officer. Just as text might have a certain meaning, the meaning should correspond to the nature of the music. And so eating is an important festive thing. Would you serve it on a festive meal? Would you serve it on paper plates?
No.
You'll see all that stuff that goes around the food is the vesting of the process of eating. It's telling you something about what it's like. So here's a Gregorian chant called the Regina Coeli, means Queen of Heaven, rejoice. So here's the text in English. Rejoice, alleluia, he whom you were worthy to bear has risen, alleluia, pray for us, alleluia. So this is a happy song or a sad song?
Happy.
Right, so you would think that it should have a happy melody. And I'll sing it for you. Regina Coeli, Queen of Heaven, and then Laetare is rejoice. Laetare. Why do you think it goes Regina Coeli and a Regina Coeli?
Negative tone.
Because you rejoice.
It's
Right.
from up to heaven.
Yeah, Queen of Heaven. And then why did it just say Laetare? Why did it say Laetare? It's a lot of rejoicing, right? And so it happens again. Quia quemeruisti portare. You were worthy to carry, to bear. ho, ho. Why is the same thing twice? Yeah, this is the underlining in music, right? This is the bold font that you pick. Carrying is so important, you say it twice. And so they call this sometimes a holy stutter.
Holy stutter.
So, can I ask your first name? I didn't get that. Can you tell me your name? Bianca. Okay. So if we were about to get married and I said, Bianca, I love you, I love you, I love you, right? I didn't say, I guess you're okay. And even I love you is good. I love you, I love you, I love you. Holy, 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 right? Sanctus, sanctus, sanctus. And so, how is that related to beauty, though?
Because the word in itself is beautiful, so when you're gonna like repeat it, you're like over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's consonantia, right? Proportionality. The word is so important, you have to say it twice. Right? It's an excess that's proportional, which is funny because we think excess is excessive, but in this case, the excess is actually correct. And so here's seen from Handel's Messiah. You know, the Alleluia chorus comes from this Alleluia. But there's another one, another line there. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight and the rough places plain. You didn't know what trouble you were going to get in the first row. Can you be a volunteer for us? Okay, so come stand right here.
Stand right here, okay.
I would like you to be the hand up and down marker
Oh my God.
of the meaning of the words, okay? So I'll sing it and you move your hand up and down. Okay, so here's the music. So you imagine that you're drawing the line of the topography of the world. So mountains are high and valleys are low.
All right.
Okay, and listen to the notes too. And every mountain and hill. You should get. And every mountain and hill, made low, the crooked straight. Don't give up. And the rough places plain. The crooked straight. Can you? Okay, thank you very much. This is called text painting in music, and you can see, and every mountain and hill made low. The notes are doing exactly what the words say. And so this is the diagram. There's actually another part of it that shall be exalted. That's the beginning. And every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain. So this is setting the music to make the meaning of the words more clear. And that's a contribution of claritas, which is a contribution of beauty, because the text has a quality that's emphasized in the music. So we have a couple of minutes left. I want to just touch on something that, if you read Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, you might have heard about this divine proportion, this divine number. And it's a ratio. And actually people have tried to figure this stuff out in relation to music. It would be interesting to see if it makes sense in food. So if you have 1 cup of flour to 0.618 cups of milk, you know, would that make something more than 1 cup to 0.5 cup, whatever it happens to be? In geometry, it's the 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. And it's a number that's found all through creation. Dan Brown stole it in the Da Vinci Code and used it in a bad way. But basically, the logic of the world, in the Christian worldview, comes right out of the Book of Wisdom, that God gave all things number, measure, and weight. And so that when you look at the measures and things that are proportioned in the world, you see what God did. And it's a way to understand the mind of God. And so humans being created in the image of God, and then there's proportionality is based on humans having a proportionality to God. We're not one-to-one with God, right? We're not 100% God, but we have a participation in Godness, and by studying us, you can find some of these things out. And so the way you would make this, if you wanted to, you draw a square, you cut it in half, and you take a compass, which is that thing you use to draw circles, and you put it here, and you draw that arc of the circle down, and you get a ratio of 1, and then this is 0.618 of that 1. So the whole thing becomes 1.618, this becomes 1. But the cool thing about this is it can be expanded or reduced forever. So you can take the 0.618 you made and make that the new 1, and then make the 0.618 of that. Well, you can make that the new 1, make that, and then that's 0.618. So it makes this spiral, it either goes in or out. Does that spiral look like anything to you?
It does look 6.
It does look like the scroll of a music note.
Or it looks 6.
conch shell.
Yeah, well, it's like a number 6, which a beautiful 6 will have a beautiful swirl in it, not just any swirl. But I heard somebody say the conch shell. This is on the cover of almost every college biology book in the world, right? There's something about that pattern of nature that this increases at a spiral that has a mathematical logic. And you see this all over the place. The top is a rose, that's the way the petals unfurl in that 0.618 swirl. The middle one is the bottom of a pine cone. And so it actually, next time you see a pine cone, pick it up and see this there. This is the center of a daisy, so the yellow part. And this has a whole bunch of these spirals going this way, all the way around, so it's turning on itself. But then they also go the other way, turning on itself the other way. And you see these all over the place. Measure your ear sometime if you're bored at a party and see if you do that. Here's cauliflower. I mean, next time you make that, look at that. It's not perfect. See, it's kind of chunky, but it's got that same pattern of this harmonic proportion. This is the top of a sunflower plant. You're looking down at it from the top. This is the bud that will open someday. And the leaves get bigger, not in a straight line proportion, but in this harmonic proportion. This is the Milky Way galaxy, so you see it at the biggest level and the smallest level. This was somebody's attempt to time the stock market. They found that markets tend to go up a certain amount, and then they go down a certain amount, and go up again and down, and that you can actually follow the mass hysteria of golden section numbers by following the stock market. And then your Visa card. Now, why do you think Visa made this card in this proportion?
Because it was designed by a designer who knew it.
A designer who designed, a smart designer knew how to do it, but why would they make it in a pleasing shape?
So you'd use it more.
Yes, exactly. So you like it. And it's pleasing. It's 3 by 5. The closest full number approximation of this is 3 by 5. 3 by 5 cards. I bet if you measured that Chicago poster over there, it would have a certain proportion that may not be a golden section, but it might be 1 and 1.5 times. You can take it to this level here. This is the Parthenon, the ancient Greek temple in Athens. And that basic logic is the square plus that 0.618. And then as it reduces, all the little parts are made in those proportions as well. Good old Mona Lisa here. Check this out.
Yeah, real.
All right. Now she looks very much serene, very much at peace. Everything seems to be in the right place. Partly that's because the human body does that, but then the artist, Leonardo da Vinci, maybe moved everything a little bit to make it a little bit better. He also gave another geometric, so the Parthenon and Mona Lisa have a lot in common, right? You would never think it by looking at them, but behind each of them is a set of proportional systems that's found in nature, nature revealing the mind of God. You know, I was trying to think, how can we apply this to hospitality and food and all that? I couldn't think of anything, but maybe you can, because this is your field. And there's the spiral right over her head. You could design a room this way, theoretically. And there's this tall pyramid, which is also the other geometry. Pyramids don't fall over very easily because they're wider at the base and the top, so they've always been a symbol that represents geometry and stability. So here's a little painting. A friend of mine, Leonard Porter, is a painter who painted this little thing of St. Dominic. And you might say, well, it looks kind of pleasing and harmonious. And then this is the geometric underpainting of it. So St. Dominic, obviously devoted to Christ, so the whole ordering of the painting is around a cross. And then the bottom part of that cross is a square, and then the middle of that square becomes a circle, and that becomes the place where the arch goes. So the arch could have been any old shape, it could have been in any old place, but he decided a square cut in half, and then a circle based on that, and then the geometry of that goes right through here, right to cross down to its head, and then even the drapery of the angels. See how the blue drapery follows the line of that circle. So it not only has the geometry, but it allows you to see it, and that's part of the claritas. And just right at the end here, this is the place where I teach up in Mundelin. You should come visit sometime. It's beautiful. Don't come now because it's cold. Come in the spring, in the summer, it'll look like this. We have this chapel in the middle. This is where the rector's office is. The library's over there behind the trees, and there's this nice thing going out into the lake. And I looked at that, and I said, there's something pleasing there, and I started fiddling around with it, and found out that it's actually designed based on the golden section proportion. So from here to the edge of this door is 1. This is the 0.618. Then you make a rectangle out of it. Then you make the triangle out of it, and then that's where it winds up. The half point of the chapel is exactly the half point of the height of that square. And this is serious business, A, to think of it, and B, to get the bulldozers to do it all in the right way. But it makes a harmonious whole that could look, I don't know what it's about. It's like if you eat a meal and you say, oh, too much salt, right? Or not enough of this. There's something not quite right. You want to find the perfect proportion so that it does what it ought to do. So, what do we take from all this, right here at the very end? Beauty is decidedly not an worldly overlay of glittery fanciness, although it may involve that. You might put a little culinary bling on your meals, right, to get people to like it. But if what's behind it is A, poisonous, or B, not delicious, then it's not beautiful, even though it